WEFUNK. We funk.
And we are going to end the Big LW first class ceremonial induction ceremony with one more fighter from the early history of the days of boxing. Okay. And we're covering a lot of ground, so we got a lot of greats on the list that will, I'm sure, make it into the Big LW KO Cast Hall of Fame eventually. Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano, the asshole from Cinderella Man, although Cinderella Man's not making it just because he should clearly have stuck with his original nickname, the Bergen Bulldog, and the Pride of Jersey. A real bummer he dropped the Pride of Jersey before the epic movie came out. That's forever now known as Cinderella Man. Because, but of course, plenty of greatness to go around in the first, the first half century of the 1900s. But I'm going to go to the very early days, to the one of the first real, I should say, stars in the sport, but potentially the first real star with the Muhammad Ali political relevancy and overall great influence in the history of sport in general. But, of course, I'm going to Jack Johnson, the first African-American heavyweight champion. Long before the days of them calling them African-Americans, by the way, as he was already the quote-unquote colored champ. But when he knocked out Tommy Burns in 1908 in Sydney, Australia, mind you. So, as well, Jack Johnson, who at this point was, the really thought of to be the most famous, black person on earth, as we're talking, fresh out of the civil rights. We're talking Civil War era. And Jack Johnson is traveling all over the world to Sydney, Australia. That boat ride, fresh off and especially in 1906, if you're a black dude taking like a 3-month boat ride, that's the Chris Rock bit comes to mind. But that boat ride must have been real long in 1908 to Sydney, Australia for Jack Johnson. But like I mentioned, race, of course, a huge part of the story, as he was not, much like Muhammad Ali, not necessarily beloved by everybody, and that would be putting it very lightly for Jack Johnson, who, after his victory over James J. Jeffries in the first fight of the century, right? The original fight of the century, which of course now every fight is the fight of the century. But in the original fight of the century, Jack Johnson versus James J. Jeffries in the All-J matchup in 1910. After Jack Johnson's victory on July 4th, mind you, after Jack Johnson's victory, riots broke out literally all across the country. And I ain't talking Black Lives Matter. I'm talking the exact opposite, as white Americans were, and I guess as well, this is just like before the days that white people realized we still had yet to learn that we were just physically inferior, okay? So somehow we were shocked by the fact that we lost the heavyweight championship to a black guy. But riots breaking out all over the country as word got out that James J. Jeffries lost to Jack Johnson in the fight of the century. And like I mentioned, the racism and hatred would unfortunately not stop for Jack Johnson, who, much like Muhammad Ali, like I said, in the relevancy in sports, and political mistreatment and all, I guess, if you want to argue politics with Muhammad Ali, Jack Johnson pretty much thrown in jail for marrying a white woman. As post his career, Jack Johnson was actually a very successful entrepreneur, especially at the time, opening a chain of integrated nightclubs. Okay, so working on integration, as you know, in American Hero, but of course, you know, married a white woman. Pulled off the grave crime of marrying a white woman in the 1920s, and was arrested on the Mann Act, which was like traveling with a white woman across state lines. And despite being one of the biggest stars and, you know, important, what would, you know, turn out to be important, you know, cultural figures in the history of sports, Jack Johnson thrown in jail on the Mann Act, eventually, you know, getting out of jail and continuing to live a very, very successful life as an entrepreneur and a political, you know, sport hero, you know, really paving the way for just, you know, in more recent years to that, but Jesse Owens and Jackie Robinson and Joe Louis, Dr. J, Jordan, a lot of J's with these goddamn early 1900 African-American sports stars, but, you know, really, of course, Jesse Owens with his heroics at the Olympics and Jackie Robinson, you know, crossing the color barrier in Major League Baseball and everything Joe Louis did for the civil rights movement. And as, you know, we argue about, you know, Black Lives Matter, not we on the show, because of course you're on the big LWKO cast, fully in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and all, but as ignorant white people in America argue the, you know, importance and validity of Black Lives Mattering in, you know, 2020. It was literally in the late 1800s when Jack Johnson started the fight for equality on the, you know, main crossover, you know, spotlight positions. Positions of responsibility and, you know, using your, you know, fame and celebrity to make an impact, as they tell LeBron James to shut up and dribble, and Colin Kaepernick is blackballed for taking a knee. It all started with Jack Johnson over 120 years ago. And 120 years later, we still fight the battle for equality. And I say we, because I hashtag BLM'd, y'all. So, despite being a white person of privilege and a part of the problem, I suppose, I'm fully supportive of the movement in the great tradition of Jack Johnson and Jesse Owens and Jackie Robinson and Muhammad Ali and the great civil rights athletes that came before us. And definitely encourage Colin Kaepernick to stay seated and LeBron James to stay talking and using their position of power for the powers of good.
Big F! WEFUNK. We funk.